Hey y'all, Matt Hepworth here, and a couple of months ago I picked up a pair of these Universal Audio SP-1 small diaphragm condensers. I got these off Reverb. They were new, but yeah, whatever. And, pretty decent sounding mic on its own. But what's really cool is with the UA Hemisphere plugin, they've been able to make it model some of the classic microphones like the AKG 451 and the Neumann KM84 and KM85. And the KM85, which I have right here, vintage, of course, is a KM84, but it has a 6 dB per octave low frequency roll off. So really gentle slope, reduces proximity effect, great on acoustic guitars and things like that. So we're going to do some testing here with these guys. And, a lot of times you see testing and they just kind of put all the capsules together and kind of hope that that's going to work well. But one of the problems, and I'm going to put my Neumann down since that is my expensive and favorite mic. One of the problems with that is they always do capsules touching. And there's a big difference in sound between this and this in some instances. Like if you're miking acoustic guitar, you're going to get a different balance from here to here. So it's not a perfect apples to apples comparison. And the other factor is that you also have each mic that interferes with the other. So if you have 3 mics together, they're actually being interfered with on their off-axis response and everything like that. So I'm going to try maybe to do some testing, this kind of non-scientific but kind of works method. But I'm also going to do some very scientific testing where I'm going to use some pre-recorded tracks and I'm going to record these where they are precisely aligned in each take, and we'll be able to see exactly how they really compare and do an ABC comparison. So let's get to work and check it out. Okay, and now we're going to do the mighty KM85 versus the SP-1. And again, we're going to do blind testing, but leave me a comment. Let me know which you prefer and whether you got it right. Let's check it out. Oh yeah, one other thing. I'm actually going to also do a little bit of testing with off-axis so we can kind of get a gauge, because the Neumann KM series is famous for having really good off-axis response. And so we'll kind of put that to the test too and see how they do. Okay, so here is a scientific shootout of these microphones. This is the UA SP-1 versus the KM85. This happens to be a 1977 KM85. And I feel like I was able to get them pretty close, but let me know your thoughts. And now, reveal. So, did you get them right? And here are the settings that I used. With the low frequency roll-off set to 3, it's a 200 hertz roll-off, exactly like the KM85. So here now is the SP-1 versus the KM85, but I have removed the low frequency roll-off that's inherent in the KM85, making it a KM84. And I just used the FabFilter Pro Q4 to do that. Let's see if you can guess which is which and see how close they are. So now, just for kicks, let's hear a comparison of the raw SP-1 versus the other two. So here's the KM84, then we'll hear the SP-84, and then we'll hear the raw SP-1. So what do you think? Does it hold its own? And these are the KM84 settings that I was using. Because it was a little bit more boomy than my KM85 without the roll-off, I ended up reducing the proximity a little bit more than the other one to compensate and make it even. So now we have the 451, and keep in mind that my AKG C451 is a modern AKG C451, and the model is based off a vintage 451. So they're not going to be identical, but let's see how close they can get. Now, we're going to include the raw SP1s for comparison. We'll have the modeled 451, the modern 451, and then our raw SP1s. See how they stack up. Now here we are with drum overheads. And in this, we're still going to roll through in pairs. So that would be the KM85 and the SP1 in the KM85 position, the KM84 and the SP1 in the KM84 position, etc. But we're also going to include the raw SP1s and see if they jump out at you. Again, this is going to be blind, and then we'll reveal it the second time through. Okay, so we're going to now do some classical. And lastly, I did some Room EQ Wizard, or REW, measurements, and we have some comparisons to show here. But let's also just take a quick peek and do a quick comparison on a couple of sections on this classical. And we're just going to use FabFilter because it will let us overlap the frequency plot of one versus another. So we'll use our source of this KM85. Then we'll take our copy and our analyzer here. We're going to select our KM85. I've got maximum and very slow, and we're just going to see how close they are in actual sound. Well, as far as what we can measure versus just the actual sound. So as you can see, the red is the original. And that's pretty darn close. Now, let's do the KM84 approximation. I actually need it to be after the low cut fix that I do. So there's that. And now here's our SP-1 doing the KM84 model. Let's see how close that is. Extremely close. And I'm just going to toggle between them sound here too. Well, of course, we're hearing the other one. So let's hear the 84, and then we'll toggle between them. I think you could easily punch in on those, but maybe that's just me. What do you think? And then let's take a look at the 451 versus the 451 hemisphere. And that is the one that I didn't feel was as close. And I think the reason is this is modeling a vintage 451, and I'm using modern 451s because that's what I have. Now, I know they're similar and in the same vein, but they sounded pretty different to me. And let's see if my ears tell me what science tells us. So here's our 451 model. And we're going to assign it to see the side chain of the 451. Still relatively close, but there's enough deviation across kind of the whole area that I think that's why they sound different when you A/B them. And let's hear the two. Yeah, a little difference in the top, little difference in the mids, and you can actually see that. It's fairly minor. I mean, we're talking only 2 or 3 dB, but across the spectrum, that much drift adds up. Unlike the 84 and 85, which I think are really close enough that you could easily punch in and out. And so the last thing I wanted to do was pull up Room EQ Wizard, or REW as it's sometimes called, and just see how close the SP-1 really gets to the mics that it's modeling. And in this case, I feel like it got pretty close. This is the KM85, and this is doing a 1/48 of an octave smoothing across the board. So it looks pretty jagged. A lot of times what you're used to seeing is going to be a 1-to-1 or a third of an octave smoothing. So your charts are going to look more like this on the older charts. Newer charts tend to be a third of an octave smoothing, looking more like that. But for more detail, we're just going to go into the 1/48 of an octave smoothing. So this is the KM85, and this is the KM85 equivalent on the SP-1. And as you can see, they are pretty darn close. Some really minor differences in where it counts. They start to drift apart a little bit in the low end. And these get, these are fairly big spaces here, 10 dB, but that's at 20 hertz. And for the most part, that's kind of cut off. I might have been able to get it slightly closer by playing with the proximity effect a little bit, but it sounded closest and matched the best overall with the proximity that I used. And then the Neumann KM series, the KM84, KM85, they are famous and loved for their off-axis response. And so let's take a look at the off-axis response. And you can see that it follows the chart pretty well. It's no wonder that they're really loved for the off-axis. Now, I'm going to take the original out here for a second, and let's see how the SP-1 off-axis did and see if it got in the ballpark of the KM85. It actually looks pretty good. Really, overall, pretty good, pretty close match. Similar drift in the low frequencies to what we saw with the on-axis responses, but looks really good. It's really pretty close both ways, quite close. There are some more differences here than there are in the on-axis, so it's not perfect on the off-axis, but it does a good job. And again, there's the original, just for comparison. Really pretty impressive. Let's take a look at the 451, which to me, it didn't feel like it got quite as close to. The highs felt different and the mids felt a little different to me. And I couldn't quite get the body the same, even with the proximity. But again, we're talking about a modern 451 that I was using versus the vintage that it's modeling. So there's the real 451. And here's the model. And really not bad. The very top end, that's where you kind of hear the difference. And the mids are a little bit different as well. I felt like the mids were a little more dipped, and it just wasn't quite as bright on top either. And this kind of shows that and shows that little bit less body. So overall, I felt like the 451 with the modeled 451 weren't as close to each other as the KM84, KM85 were to the modeled versions. And I think the graphs kind of bear out those same thoughts. So, how do you think the SP-1 with the hemisphere did versus the 451 or the KM84 or 85? Let me know in the comments. Also, how did you think it sounded on its own? So, as always, thanks for watching. Matt Hepworth. See you next time.